July 15, 1982. Cedar Ridge Cemetery, Blairstown, New Jersey. A gravedigger is making his morning rounds when he notices a gold chain lying in the dirt near the tree line. He walks closer. Then he looks over the embankment. A girl is lying on the slope below. Peacock print skirt. A gold cross tangled in her hair. No shoes. And where her face should be, nothing. 40 years later, police would know exactly who killed her. He would confess. More than once. He would even put it in writing. But they still could not charge him, because they did not know who she was. This case took 40 years to solve. For 40 years, this girl was known only as Princess Doe. No name, no family, no answers. Today, we are following the investigation from the moment she was found to the breakthrough that finally gave her name back. If you enjoy deeply researched true crime documentaries, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future cases. Blairstown, New Jersey was the kind of town the rest of the world drove past without stopping. A farming community in Warren County, pressed up against the Pennsylvania border, population fewer than 5,000. The kind of place where the same families had worked the same land for generations, where summers were long and quiet, and the only news that mattered was local. Nothing unusual ever happened off Highway 94. Until July 15, 1982. George Kise was a gravedigger. He arrived at Cedar Ridge Cemetery that Tuesday morning, the way he arrived every morning. Without ceremony. Without expectation. He made his way toward the north end of the grounds, where the property sloped down into a heavily wooded area above a creek. That was when he saw the gold chain. It was lying in the dirt near the tree line. Small white beads evenly spaced along the links, and at the center of it, an ornate 14-karat cross pendant. He stared at it for a moment. Nobody leaves something like that behind by accident. He looked over the embankment. She was lying on her back, partially down the slope. She was wearing a red short-sleeve pullover shirt with yellow piping along the shoulder panels and blue and black piping at the neckline and sleeves. Her skirt was wide and wraparound, red, white, and blue, with a vivid peacock print running along the lower hem. Distinctive clothing, the kind investigators usually identify within hours. She had no shoes, no socks, no undergarments anywhere on her body or in the surrounding area. And her face was gone. Someone had taken a heavy, blunt object and used it on her face and skull over and over until the bone fractured in multiple places. The force required to do that was not incidental. It was deliberate. The weapon was never found. She had tried to fight back. The wounds on her arms and hands told that story. She had raised them. She had struggled. She had done everything a person can do in those final moments when they understand what is happening. It was not enough. George Kise called the police. The Blairstown Police Department arrived. The New Jersey State Police arrived. Investigators from the Warren County Prosecutor's Office secured the scene and began what would become one of the longest unresolved identity cases in the history of American law enforcement. At first, they believed this would be a straightforward identification. They started with what they had. She was estimated to be between 14 and 18 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, 110 pounds, straight, shoulder-length, medium brown hair. Blue eyeshadow still visible on her eyelids. Her left ear was double-pierced, though no earrings were recovered. The nails on her right hand were painted red. Her left hand had none. Her top 2 front teeth appeared slightly darker than the rest. No tattoos, no birthmarks, no scars. Surely someone was looking for her. On July 16, 1982, the day after George Kise found her, an autopsy was performed by Dr. Araciela Linares, Assistant New Jersey State Medical Examiner, at the Edwin Albano Institute of Forensic Science in Newark, New Jersey. Cause of death: blunt trauma to the face and head, multiple fractures. Dr. Linares could not determine whether the victim had been sexually assaulted. The level of decomposition made a conclusive finding impossible. The skirt had been found lying across her legs rather than on her body. No undergarments were present. Neither detail produced a forensic conclusion. Based on the July heat and the condition of the remains, the initial estimate placed her death at 1 to 3 weeks before discovery. Investigators would later realize they were wrong. They came to believe she had been killed on or around July 11, 1982. 4 days before George Kise found her. Not weeks. Fingerprints were taken and run through the New Jersey State Police. Nothing came back. Lieutenant Eric Kranz carried them personally to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C. Nothing came back. She had no criminal record, no prior arrests, no existing prints anywhere in the United States. She simply did not exist in any database the country had. A composite sketch was commissioned and distributed nationally. Kranz sent it to every law enforcement agency within reach. Tips came in from New Jersey, from eastern Pennsylvania, from communities all the way through New York. Nothing matched. He checked school enrollment records himself. Nothing. The shirt and the skirt were traced to a manufacturer in the American Midwest. Investigators believed the clothing might finally tell them who she was. Instead, they found another dead end. Both brand labels had been removed from the garments. 3 witnesses would later come forward independently to say they recognized the style from a Long Island clothing store. But that store had since closed. And that lead, like every other one, went nowhere. Kranz sat with each dead end one at a time. Every fingerprint return that came back empty. Every school record that turned up no missing girl matching her description. Every tip that dissolved under scrutiny. He had been the first officer to arrive at Cedar Ridge Cemetery that morning, and he was not going to be the person who stopped looking. In those first days, he did something that would carry this case further than any single piece of evidence. He gave her a name. Not Jane Doe. He said that was too cold for a child. He called her Princess Doe, because she was young, because she deserved to be distinguished from the anonymous dead. A name that said, "We see you. We are still here. We are not walking away." Then the investigation caught its first real break. 2 days before her body was found, someone had seen her alive. A woman named Anne-Marie Latimer came forward after photographs of the victim's clothing appeared in a local newspaper. She told investigators she had been shopping with her daughter at a supermarket directly across the road from Cedar Ridge Cemetery on July 13, 1982. She had noticed a girl at the checkout buying cigarettes. She remembered the skirt the moment she saw the photograph. The peacock print. The colors. She could describe it without hesitation. The girl had her hair pinned up. Her expression was composed. Not frightened, not distressed, just quiet. The look of someone moving through an ordinary Tuesday with somewhere else in their mind. She was 48 hours from death. A second witness, a mother who had been shopping in the same area that day, also came forward. She described a young woman consistent with the clothing description. Neither of them knew her name, but they had unknowingly answered one question. Princess Doe had been alive just 2 days before George Kise found her. The next question was even bigger. Who had brought her to Blairstown? Before this story goes any further, we stop. Because she was not a composite sketch. She was not a case file. She was not the girl with no face. She was not Princess Doe. She had a name long before anyone gave her one. Her name was Dawn Rita Olanick. She was born on August 5, 1964, in New York City. Her father was Robert W. Olanick. Her mother was Constance Wall. She had an older brother named Robert and a younger sister named Lynn. The family grew up in West Babylon, a working-class community on the south shore of Long Island in Suffolk County, New York. When her parents divorced, Dawn moved with her mother and her sister to Bohemia, another small community in Suffolk County. She enrolled in the Connequot Central School District. She was a junior at Connequot High School, 17 years old. She had just finished her junior year. On June 24, 1982, there was an argument at home. Her mother asked her to leave. Her brother Robert would later tell investigators those were the last words the family ever exchanged with her. She left. No one knew they were saying goodbye. She was never seen or heard from again. No missing persons report was ever filed that connected back to her. She walked out of her mother's house in Bohemia, New York, and disappeared into a country that had no record of where she went. 19 days passed. What happened during those 19 days has never been fully reconstructed. Investigators later developed a theory that Dawn may have been trying to reach Florida. What they do know is this. Sometime during those 19 days, she met a man named Arthur Kinlaw in the West Babylon area of Long Island. That meeting changed everything. 48 hours before her body was discovered, Anne-Marie Latimer saw Dawn buying cigarettes at a supermarket across the road from Cedar Ridge Cemetery. She had no way of knowing she was looking at a girl who would soon become one of America's most famous unidentified victims. Dawn was 17 years old. She should have been thinking about her senior year of high school. Instead, she was only 2 days away from becoming Princess Doe, and the man she had met was already deciding what would happen next. Months passed. No family came forward. No missing persons report surfaced. No one came to claim her. It was as if the girl from Cedar Ridge Cemetery had never existed at all. The residents of Blairstown decided that was not something they were willing to accept. Using funds donated by members of the community, they paid for a coffin, a cemetery plot, and a headstone. She was buried on January 22, 1983, in Cedar Ridge Cemetery, not far from the slope where George Kise had found her 6 months before. George Kise dug her grave. The man who found her became the man who buried her. For the second time in 6 months, he stood over the same patch of ground. This time, there was nothing left he could do for her except make sure she was not forgotten. Her headstone was engraved with words that would be quoted in courtrooms, newspapers, television broadcasts, and documentaries for the next 40 years. Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all, written by people who had never heard her name, who had no way of knowing it, who gave her what they had. 5 months after her burial, something happened in Washington, D.C. that permanently changed the way the United States handled unidentified victims. And Princess Doe was the reason. On June 30th, 1983, FBI Director William H. Webster entered Princess Doe into the National Crime Information Center database. She became the first unidentified person ever entered into the NCIC in the history of United States federal law enforcement. Before Princess Doe, there was no national mechanism for tracking unidentified victims. They fell through the cracks. Her case exposed that gap. Her case became the reason that category now exists. A 17-year-old girl, whose name nobody knew, changed the way America tracks its unidentified dead. She never knew it. The country had started paying attention. Not because investigators had solved anything, because they still had nothing. Lieutenant Kranz kept pushing. He placed her story into every newspaper and television outlet that would take it. HBO came calling in the months after her burial. They were producing a documentary called Missing and wanted to include the case. Kranz agreed. The documentary was filmed over several weeks. It contained actual footage of Princess Doe's body being recovered from Cedar Ridge Cemetery, along with footage of her January 1983 funeral. The same film also followed the disappearance of Iowa paperboy Johnny Gosch, whose case had captured national attention that same year. The documentary aired. More tips arrived. More letters came in. None of them held up. Then, in the year 2000, MTV's reality series Fear filmed its 5th episode at Camp Nobi Bosco in Hardwick Township, New Jersey. They called the location Camp Spirit Lake. They used Princess Doe's murder as the foundation of their horror premise. In the show's version, she had been ritually sacrificed, decapitated, a ghost. While investigators were still trying to learn who she was, television had already turned her into a ghost story. She was still unidentified when that episode aired. Her brother Robert and her sister Lynn still did not know where she was. Her family had spent nearly 2 decades not knowing, and a cable network decided that made for good television. Then investigators believed they had finally solved the biggest mystery in the case. They were wrong. And that mistake would cost years. Through the late 1980s and into the 90s, a theory hardened inside New Jersey law enforcement. Investigators became increasingly convinced that Princess Doe was a teenager named Diane Janice Dye, a girl from San Jose, California, who had disappeared on July 30th, 1979, 3 years before the body was found in Blairstown. The resemblance between the two cases was enough to move officials towards certainty, too quickly. Several New Jersey law enforcement officials became so confident in the match that they held a formal press conference. They publicly announced that Diane Dye was Princess Doe. The story spread nationally. Lieutenant Eric Kranz did not believe it. He said so publicly and repeatedly. Investigators in California who had worked Diane Dye's disappearance said the same. Diane's own family was, by multiple accounts, furious at what New Jersey law enforcement had done. Dental record comparisons had already raised inconsistencies significant enough to demand caution. Nobody slowed down. The case finally had an answer. It just was not the right one. In 2003, DNA ended the debate. Princess Doe's genetic profile was compared directly against a sample provided by Diane Dye's mother, Patricia. The result was conclusive. Princess Doe was not Diane Dye. Diane Dye remains missing to this day. The false identification cost years, not months, years of investigative energy aimed at the wrong answer, while the real answer remained buried in Blairstown. In 2012, 30 years after George Kise found her, investigators submitted samples of Princess Doe's hair and a tooth for isotope analysis. The chemical composition indicated she had spent significant time on Long Island, New York, before her death. It was the closest anyone had come to placing her geographically, but a geography was not a name. That same year, her case appeared on America's Most Wanted. A new computer-generated facial reconstruction was broadcast on CNN. A book was published, The Untold Story of Princess Doe, by Christy Lee Naparano, a fictionalized account, because the true one still had no author. On July 15, 2012, the 30th anniversary of the day her body was found, a memorial service was held at Cedar Ridge Cemetery at the top of the ravine where she had been lying. On October 12, 2014, she was honored again at a missing persons rally. Blairstown came back every single year. 30 years of sketches, broadcasts, memorials. Investigators were still missing the one thing that unlocked everything else, her name. And the man responsible had already confessed to the murder. He just could not tell investigators who she was. That missing name stood between a killer's confession and a murder charge. Investigators had spent 30 years trying to identify the victim. The man responsible was much easier to identify. Arthur Kinlaw was born on November 7, 1953. He was 28 years old the summer he killed Dawn Olanick. He had been in trouble with the law since 1971. The charges included robbery, assault, weapons offenses, forgery, fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. That list was not a series of isolated mistakes. It was the blueprint of a man who had spent years learning how to find vulnerable people and exploit them. By 1982, Arthur Kinlaw was not improvising. He had a system. He and his wife Donna operated a prostitution ring out of Hunts Point in the Bronx. Kinlaw moved between the Long Island communities of Central Islip, Greenlawn, and Bellport, recruiting women from Suffolk County. Young women. Women who had left home. Women with nowhere else to go. He sent them to Hunts Point. While doing that, he and Donna traveled across 7 states, committing fraud, robbery, and burglary. Then, investigators noticed something they could not ignore. Dawn Olanick had grown up in West Babylon. Kinlaw recruited women in West Babylon. That overlap was not coincidence. It was almost certainly where they met. But Dawn was not the only woman Arthur Kinlaw killed. She was the first investigators were able to place inside a much larger pattern. By the time detectives assembled the full picture, they were looking at years of violence spanning multiple Long Island communities. Some victims had names. Others never got one. The first was Dawn Olanick, killed on or around July 11, 1982. She was 17. She should have been starting her senior year. The second was Christine Cosma. She had turned to sex work to support a drug addiction. In September 1982, Kinlaw brought her back to his Central Islip home. When she refused to stay and work for him, he shot her multiple times in the head. Her body was later found in a wooded area near Coram. Her murder remains officially unsolved. She is still waiting for justice. The third victim still has no name. She was a disabled tenant living in the Kinlaw's Bellport home. After an argument in 1983, Kinlaw beat her to death, buried her beneath the backyard patio, and poured fresh concrete over her grave. Police did not find her until December 2000. She is still known only as the Suffolk County Jane Doe. She is still waiting for a name. The fourth was a teenager investigators know only as Linda. The Kinlaws met her inside the Blackberry Jam Club in Bay Shore in April 1984. They convinced her to trust them. When she refused to join their operation and threatened to contact police, Kinlaw killed her. Her body was dumped into the East River. She washed up weeks later. She has never been identified. She is still waiting too. 4 women: Dawn Olanick, Christine Cosma, the Suffolk County Jane Doe, Linda, and investigators believe that list may still be incomplete. When Warren County Prosecutor James Pfeiffer was asked in July 2022 whether Kinlaw could have had additional victims, he did not hesitate. He said there was a significant possibility. Arthur Kinlaw spent years targeting vulnerable women. Investigators believe they still do not know all of their names. Investigators believe Arthur Kinlaw encountered Dawn Olanick somewhere in the West Babylon area of Long Island during the summer of 1982. She was 17. She had been away from home for less than 3 weeks. No missing persons report had been filed. Nobody was officially looking for her. She had no reason to believe the man approaching her had done this before. Kinlaw tried to recruit her into his operation. She refused. Everything that happened next comes from 2 sources: Kinlaw's own written confessions and the testimony of the only eyewitness to the murder. Kinlaw drove Dawn out of Long Island, into New Jersey, to Blairstown, a town neither of them had any connection to. No family, no friends, no history. Investigators believe that was deliberate. If her body was found there, it would be much harder to connect her disappearance to Long Island. He drove into Cedar Ridge Cemetery, to the north end of the property, the same wooded slope where George Kise would make his discovery 4 days later. That is where Dawn Olanick was killed. When it was over, she was left on the hillside wearing a peacock print skirt, a gold cross tangled in her hair. No shoes, no identification, nothing that could tell investigators who she was. Kinlaw drove home. He changed his clothes, disposed of what he had been wearing, cleaned the vehicle. Then he looked at his wife and gave her a warning. If she ever told anyone what had happened, he would do the same to her. Donna Kinlaw kept that secret for 17 years, until a completely unrelated investigation finally forced her to speak. In June of 1998, 16 years after Dawn was murdered in Blairstown, everything began to unravel. Not in New Jersey, not because investigators found new evidence. It unraveled in California because of a welfare fraud scheme. Arthur and Donna Kinlaw were arrested in California after Donna was caught attempting to fraudulently obtain benefits using the name Elena, the identity of one of Arthur's former prostitutes. That name was traced back to a real woman on Long Island. Investigators expected a fraud interview. Instead, they opened the door to multiple homicide investigations. When investigators sat Donna down to question her about the fraud, she did not answer only the questions she was asked. She started talking about murders. She told them about Linda, the teenager from Bay Shore they had met at the Blackberry Jam Club in April of 1984, the girl they had killed and dumped in the East River. She told them about the disabled woman buried beneath the concrete patio in Bellport. She told them about Christine Cosma, shot in Central Islip and left in the woods of Coram. Then she mentioned one more victim, a teenage girl Arthur had brought home during the summer of 1982. She said Arthur left the house with the girl. He came back alone. He said he had been to a cemetery in New Jersey, and that was all she said, or so investigators believed. Donna presented it as something she learned after Arthur returned home. That was not the truth. Later, investigators compared Donna's account with statements Arthur had given separately. The stories did not match. Arthur claimed Donna had not learned about the murder afterward. She had been there. She had stood inside Cedar Ridge Cemetery that night. She had watched Arthur Kinlaw kill Dawn Olanick. When investigators confronted Donna with that contradiction, she changed her story. She admitted she had been present. She admitted she had watched the murder happen. Then she sat down with a forensic artist and helped create a composite sketch of the girl she had seen die. The sketch closely resembled the latest reconstruction of Princess Doe. For a moment, it looked like investigators finally had everything they needed. They did not. Neither Arthur nor Donna Kinlaw could tell investigators the girl's name. Think about that. Arthur had recruited her, driven her across a state line, taken her into the woods beside a cemetery, killed her. Donna had watched it happen. Yet neither of them knew who she was. Lieutenant Stephen Spears, of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office, and Detective Howard Brown of the New Jersey State Police pursued the Kinlaw lead with every tool available. Then they ran into a wall. Without the identity of Princess Doe, Spears explained, there was no way to place her with Kinlaw before the murder. There was no way to connect the victim in the cemetery to the girl he admitted killing. A confession without a name was not enough. An eyewitness was not enough. In 2000, Arthur Kinlaw was convicted of 2 unrelated first-degree murders. He was sentenced to 20 years to life and transferred to Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. Donna was convicted of manslaughter for her role in Linda's murder. She was sentenced to 3 to 11 years and released in 2003. 5 years later, Arthur Kinlaw did something almost unheard of. He picked up a pen. He wrote to the Warren County Prosecutor's Office. Then he wrote again. He gave Lieutenant Spears and Detective Brown a formal statement. He signed a sworn affidavit. In his own handwriting, he admitted he was physically responsible for the death of the unidentified young woman found in Cedar Ridge Cemetery in July of 1982. He confessed, more than once, in writing, in person, to the investigators handling the case, and they still could not charge him. Not because they doubted the confession, because they still could not prove who the victim was. By 2018, Arthur Kinlaw became eligible for parole. Nothing in New Jersey could stop that without identifying Princess Doe. Let that settle. A convicted killer sat in prison. He had confessed. He had signed an affidavit. Investigators believed him. An eyewitness supported him. Yet none of it was enough because the victim still had no legal identity. Everything depended on one unanswered question. Who was Princess Doe? That question stood between a confessed killer and a possible release. It also stood between Dawn Olanick and justice. The answer would not come from another witness. It would not come from another confession. It would come from science. Now the investigation enters its final chapter. Now the science begins. The answer had not been hiding. The technology simply had not existed yet. The DNA work had started years before the breakthrough. In 1999, Princess Doe's remains were exhumed for the first time. Samples were taken from her femur bone and sent to a laboratory in Baltimore, Maryland. She was buried again. The testing produced nothing investigators could use. In 2007, the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification made a second attempt using skeletal remains recovered from Cedar Ridge Cemetery. Again, the result fell short. 25 years underground, through changing seasons and rising water tables, had damaged the biological material beyond what the science of the time could recover. 2 exhumations, 2 laboratories, 2 dead ends. Meanwhile, Arthur Kinlaw sat in prison writing confession letters that prosecutors still could not use. The case needed something the science of 2007 could not yet provide. Then, in 2021, the science finally caught up. On May 19, 2021, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children contacted the Warren County Prosecutor's Office with an offer. Grant funding had been secured to try again using technology that simply did not exist during the earlier examinations. What had once returned nothing might finally return an identity. On June 18, 2021, a California laboratory called Astria Forensics accepted the case. Astria specialized in recovering DNA from samples most laboratories considered unusable. Carol Schweitzer, a forensic supervisor with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, explained why their work mattered. They could recover DNA from biological material that otherwise held little or no scientific value. The evidence Astria received consisted of only 2 items: a molar tooth, an eyelash. Both had remained underground since July of 1982, 39 years. On February 10, 2022, Astria confirmed what earlier laboratories could not. The extraction had worked. A viable DNA profile had been created from the tooth and the eyelash. It was immediately sent to Innovative Forensic Investigations, a genetic genealogy firm led by Jennifer Moore. Moore agreed to work the case without charge. 12 days later, investigators received the phone call they had been waiting decades to hear. They had a candidate. Sit with that for a moment. 40 years. multiple exhumations, a confession that could not be used, a name that nobody could find, and then 12 days of genealogy work returned what 4 decades could not. Detectives drove to West Babylon, New York. They sat down with Robert Olanick Jr. He listened as investigators explained why they had come. Then he confirmed something no one had been able to prove for 40 years. His sister Dawn had left home in June of 1982 after an argument. She had never returned. A DNA sample was collected from Dawn's sister, Lynn. The sample was sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification for final comparison. On April 29, 2022, the results came back. Princess Doe was Dawn Rita Olanick, born August 5, 1964. Daughter of Constance Wall and Robert W. Olanick, sister to Robert and Lynn, a junior at Connequot High School, 17 years old, killed in a cemetery she had never planned to visit. By a man who could not even remember her name. She had spent 40 years in that grave without it. Now she had it back. And for the first time in 4 decades, investigators could finally call Arthur Kinlaw's victim by her real name. On July 13, 2022, everything the investigation had been chasing for 4 decades finally became actionable. Detectives from the New Jersey State Police issued a formal arrest warrant for Arthur Kinlaw. Date of birth: November 7, 1953. Age 68 years old. The charge: first-degree murder for the killing of Dawn Rita Olanick in July of 1982. He was already serving a life sentence for 2 other murders. He had been eligible for parole since 2018. For years, prosecutors could not act on his confession because the victim had no legal identity. Now she did. The name Dawn Rita Olanick closed the gap that had protected him for decades. 2 days later, on July 15, 2022, exactly 40 years after George Kise looked over the edge of an embankment at Cedar Ridge Cemetery and found a girl with a gold cross tangled in her hair, investigators returned to Blairstown. This time, they were not searching for her name. They were announcing it. At 9:30 that morning, Warren County Prosecutor James Pfeiffer and New Jersey State Police Superintendent Colonel Patrick J. Callahan stood before reporters at the Blairstown Municipal Building. Dawn Olanick's family was sitting in the room. After 40 years, they finally had answers. Prosecutor Pfeiffer spoke first. For 40 years, law enforcement has not given up on Princess Doe. Science and technology made the impossible possible in this case. Acting New Jersey Attorney General Matthew Platkin followed. To everyone who worked on this case across decades, thank you. I also want to recognize her family, who represent who we do this work for. I hope this provides a small measure of closure and comfort. Colonel Callahan then addressed the room. He said he first heard about Princess Doe when he was 13 years old. Now he stood before the public as superintendent of the New Jersey State Police. He told reporters he was also speaking as the father of 2 daughters and the brother of 2 sisters. This case, he said, had become personal for everyone who worked on it. Then one final person walked to the microphone. Scott Hassler, Dawn's cousin. A photograph of Dawn was pinned to his lapel. He looked toward the people who had cared for a girl they had never met. Then he said, "This is a very big deal for my family. We miss her dearly. I would like to thank Blairstown for treating my cousin like she was one of their own. It touches our family deeply. My cousin is always in my heart." As of the most recent information available, Arthur Kinlaw remains at Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. He is awaiting extradition to New Jersey to stand trial for the first-degree murder of Dawn Rita Olanick. No trial date has been publicly confirmed. The New Jersey murder charge keeps his parole on hold. But Dawn was not the only victim Arthur Kinlaw left behind. The disabled woman buried beneath the patio in Bellport still has no name. Linda, the teenage girl from the Blackberry Jam Club in Bayshore, still has no name. They are still waiting for someone to do for them what science finally did for Dawn. The headstone at Cedar Ridge Cemetery still reads, Princess Doe. Missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all. Those words were carved by people who had never met her. A community that had no obligation to her chose to remember her anyway. George Kise found her. George Kise buried her. Lieutenant Eric Kranz refused to let the investigation die. The people of Blairstown returned to that grave every July 15 for 40 years. Then science caught up with hope. A molar tooth, an eyelash, 39 years underground. That was enough. Enough for 2 scientists in California to recover a DNA profile. Enough for a genealogist to find a family in West Babylon. Enough for a laboratory in Texas to say the words investigators had been waiting 4 decades to hear. Dawn Rita Olanick. Not Princess Doe. Daughter. Sister. 17 years old. A girl with blue eyeshadow, red nail polish on one hand, a peacock print skirt, a gold cross around her neck, and a future that ended far too soon. She never reached the place she was trying to go. But after 40 years, her name finally came home. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Just Crime Talks and share it with someone who believes forgotten victims deserve to be remembered. And before you go, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. We would love to know how far these stories reach. Every unidentified victim is someone's daughter, someone's brother, someone's friend, someone still waiting to come home. Thank you for watching.